Visceral fat is the most dangerous fat in a person's body, and it is one of the leading causes of heart disease. So, today I am going to give you 5 tips for the best ways to reduce visceral fat in your body. All right, now, first, we're focusing on the carnivore diet and meat quality and fat ratios. Now, you don't necessarily have to be carnivore. You can be more keto, ketovore, that type of thing, but it's still basically the same type of premises here. We're going to prioritize nutrient dense meat like ribeye, ground beef, lamb, bison, and then some like fishes like salmon, sardines, maybe some organ meats if you like to eat them. I personally don't eat any organ meats. Some people like them, some people don't really like them. That's kind of your own choice. Don't eat too many organ meats. It is possible to eat too much and then you have too many nutrients coming into your body. So be a little bit careful of that. But as long as you're just eating, a little bit of organ meats every week, that's not a big problem. So it's really up to you there. All right, but you want to make sure you're also eating enough fat. And we're talking about the fat that comes from animals, okay? I know in the past, people have told you saturated fat is bad for you. Back in the 80s, we had the whole low fat uh, diet thing, right? That you should go low fat, but that is a problem. And we've seen obesity rise and rise. So you need to get good animal fat. Okay. Saturated fat is not a problem. Uh, Too little fat can spike things like cortisol, which is a stress hormone, and that promotes visceral fat. So we need to make sure we're getting fat. Okay. Omega 3 is a key. You hear a lot about omega 3s, omega 6s. You want to stay a little bit away from omega 6, but you want to increase that omega 3. That helps to reduce inflammation in the visceral fat deposits. So that's going to help you to lose some of that visceral fat. So omega 3 is key. Something I didn't mention when I talked about salmon and that could be like things like shrimp and stuff like that as well. Um, Eggs, not really mention that either when I was talking about meat, but eggs are a very good source as well for you. All right. Number 2 is meal timing and fasting. And intermittent fasting is a very, very effective tool for visceral fat reduction. So that's something you can do is sticking to a window. Maybe you eat twice a day and you eat no more than like 6 hours apart, and that gives you an 18-hour intermittent fast. Maybe you eat once a day and it's a 24-hour intermittent fast, whatever it is that you can do. You want to avoid snacking though and just eat in the meals that you're eating and try and make it, you know, as consistent as possible in terms of having that intermittent fasting window. I understand sometimes you might be a little bit hungry, you end up eating again, third time, and your intermittent fasting window isn't as high. But the more often you can have that 18-hour or that 24-hour intermittent fasting, that is going to be key for your visceral fat reduction. All right. Now, another thing in meal timing and fasting thing, is let's not forget that we should add some fermented foods. And this is just a little bit that we're talking about, but increasing your beneficial gut bacteria helps to regulate metabolism, insulin sensitivity, and your inflammation. These are all key factors that are linked to visceral fat accumulation in your body. So fermented foods have the plant toxins and carbohydrates removed from them during the fermentation process. Of course, there are fermented foods that are animal based as well, like things like yogurt. You get goat yogurt, regular yogurt, whatever it is. You can get kefir, that kind of things. But if you're looking at like things like sauerkraut, you can ferment yourself to make sure it's fermented long enough to get all of the carbohydrates out. But if not, if you are getting a high quality sauerkraut from the grocery store, you know that the plant toxins have been removed and most, if not all, the carbohydrates have been removed as well during that fermentation process. So now you couple this with the carnivore diet and it helps to better digest fats and the proteins to reduce the inflammation in your body, which is going to, again, reduce and lower that visceral fat. Okay, number 3 on this is strength and resistance training. Muscle growth increases visceral fat reduction, which is huge. focus on lifting heavy weights or doing things like sprinting. You can do both if possible, right? You can do one day you're doing weights and then another day you do sprinting. Sprinting, you're probably looking at one, maybe 2 or 3 times a week at the most, especially early on. You're probably 1 or 2 times a week. And, you do maybe 5, 6 sprints and it's in like a 20-minute period and you're done. Heavy lifting doesn't have to be this long hour thing in the gym. Get right to it. Do your heavy lifting, do your arms, do your legs. You can do it all in one time. Do that 2 to 3 times a week, and you're going to be in great shape for reducing visceral fat. All right, number 4 is something called NEAT. This is non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Basically, it's things like walking more, taking the stairs instead of the elevator. If you're somewhere that has an elevator, just take the stairs. If you're sitting at a desk, take a couple minutes each hour to get up and walk around. This is something that really helps a lot with getting rid of visceral fat. People that go out and do a mile walk every day have a great advantage in reducing visceral fat. So that is the number 4 tip here. All right. That takes us to the last one. Number 5 is optimizing lifestyle factors. So there's a few things to this. The first thing that we really have to talk about is your sleep. You want to get at least 7 to 9 hours of sleep each night. Poor sleep does mean higher cortisol, which means more visceral fat accumulation. So the better sleep you get, the less visceral fat you're going to have right off the bat. So that is huge. Now, you need to reduce stress, things like meditation, breathing exercises, getting sunlight, and doing something simple like a hobby to reduce stress is huge. This will reduce the visceral fat deposition as well on your body, the deposits of the visceral fat, and that is huge for you. Avoiding alcohol. I know some people don't want to hear that because they like to drink alcohol, but you know what? Alcohol has been linked to increasing visceral fat directly just from drinking the alcohol. So avoid the alcohol and you're going to do better with visceral fat reduction right off the bat. And it's really going to be huge just for your health overall because there's a lot of toxins in alcohol, just like there are in certain plants that might affect people. Some people might not be affected by some plants, other people might be. And, it's the same thing with alcohol, really. There are toxins in there. And again, it's very much linked to increasing visceral fat. So you got to avoid that alcohol. All right. So these were 5 really good tips for reducing visceral fat. And the best thing is to practice all 5 of these. I know some people might say, well, can you rank these in order? But you really need to practice all 5 of these because visceral fat is really probably the number 1 link to heart disease and other health issues like high blood pressure, stuff like that. So you really want to get rid of that visceral fat. And these are 5 great tips for reducing it.